Because if it's organic and it's actually people that are hungry and that is needing food, that's a different kind of story. But I don't think that that's the way that it's going to be. It's going to be a planned event, right? And they're going to pay people to go out and disrupt these people's food and the farmers and stuff so that they could bring in the military.
There's no way in anybody's right mind that you would let the military occupy your farmland across the nation, unless the flash mobs were targeting farms, and then the army would be, in some people's opinion, a welcome relief from having to do like Wild West style. Everybody put perimeters up of all the neighbors doing watch on radios and stuff.
They're worried about the big people, the ones that are growing for the stores, the ones that are growing for that have contracts with the government to distribute their product.
Oh, I agree, because look at what COVID has done, is wiped out almost every small business and independently owned business across the world. So everything's back to corporate control of all business, pretty much. Not going to say 100%. How many businesses have gone out of business since the COVID thing? Millions, plural. The thing that I see with the restrictions was to wipe out all small business. Well, now you need to wipe out all small farms, so then everything still comes under corporate control. Now it's just the next step of consolidation. Friends, it seems like big government, tech giants, and unelected oligarchs are trying to destroy America. And you can see the supply chain disintegrating across the planet. And one of these things that's going to fail along with that will be the food supply chain. Do you have enough emergency food? Most people don't, and they'll panic when the time comes. And give yourself the peace of mind knowing that you have storable foods. 20+ year shelf life allows you to make wise choices, be able to stay home, avoid the chaos. So head on over to foodwithadapt2030.com and see what else My Patriot Supply has to keep your family's grand solar minimum prepared. And now on with the video. And good afternoon, everyone. Guess who I have back? Ryder Lee. So much positive feedback. Raised by Giants. Remember, you enjoyed the interview so much. The comments were just outrageous. Far more comments on those videos than almost every other video that I'd done, except maybe a David Morgan video. But the things were real that we were talking about. They were very timely, and we've seen a giant uptick in things happening at the moment here. So Ryder, appreciate you coming back on. We just have about an hour today to go through a few items, and we were trying to connect some dots, chatting back and forth, trying to get this time set up here. So what do you see moving forward, or what do you see, I guess, the narrative or the next moves, the next chess pieces being moved around? What do we envision for the next year here? I have from May and then to the end of the year kind of sussed out in terms of months and quarters that things will change. But what are you thinking now?
Well, thank you so much for having me back on, David. I shaved my beard off, so hopefully people still recognize me. But yes, thank you so much for inviting me back on. Really fascinating times that we live in right now. Food prices at an all-time high, crop yields down, gas prices up, supply chain disruptions inbound. It's incredible. So I think that we're going to have a really good conversation, even though that it's going to be kind of short. But I think that the first thing, it's amazing that people thought that we could shut down the world for 2 years and put everybody on unemployment, close small businesses, and everything would just go on as normal, right? With no disruptions to the economy or food disruption or hyperinflation. It's really, really fascinating, David. Like, who could have seen all of this coming? And as you know, every action we take gets an equal and opposite reaction, right? And we haven't even begun to feel the repercussions of our actions from the past 2 years. And based off of the past and past actions from governments, leaders, politicians, influential groups, it's not going to get any better that I can see.
Such a hopeful message to begin the broadcast with. Thanks, Ryder. You just set up my day.
I mean, it's really all about scarcity, right? If you can manufacture a shortage, which they are, it's not for the lack of not having the food yet. The farmers are abundant, as you know. It's the disruption of the food that's the problem right now. It's not the food not making it. It's about the food not making it to the markets. So it's any way that you look at it, it's manufactured, and it's getting like that everywhere now. It used to just be like parts of the country that were kind of experiencing shortages, with bare shelves, no product, but now it's everywhere, right? And I'm sure some of that could be attributed by some people that we just got through the holiday season, but I think that that's just accelerated it. And they're using that as an excuse, because I don't remember after a holiday season before every single store in my area having empty shelves, right? Maybe a few, but again, not every single one. So something more is going on.
If you push people to the food shortage, because you see the restrictions being lifted across the world right now suddenly, because they see the citizens taking action against the mandates. So in unison, the entire planet suddenly lifted them as quickly as they implemented them. Now, then you could say, oh, the people won, look. But then what's behind that? The next thing is going to be the food shortages. Now, will it be the shortage where we're going to be crawling on the ground with our bellies, bloated because we haven't had enough food, and that's the last step before starvation? So the fertilizer coming in is going to be a 1% loss to a 1% decline in yield. Now, there's been a new bevy of articles out, and the one that's making waves now, there's a Zero Hedge article saying that the food supply shortage is going to be far, 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 should I say it again, far greater than anybody anticipates. So just the current state of affairs here, the fertilizer price is running about 4 times higher than it was last year. Got a few messages. I talked to some people in the ag business, and farms that are over 1,000 acres generally buy a little bit ahead. So they know they're going to be pre-preparing the fields, the time they're going to plant. So they try to get everything ready, because, putting fertilizer at a uniform spread over 1,000 acres, but that's the smallest. Sometimes there are 10,000 acres. 25,000 acres. I mean, you got to have everything in a row and completely everything in bins, and it's a full working operation. So they're always forward buying, and they're always full, so they know when they need to plant and harvest and apply the different herbicides, whatever, during planting. Well, that's for anybody with over 1,000 acres or 10,000, whatnot. So a lot of people that do farming they're down on the 100 acre, 200 acre, 50 acre, 20 acre plots. And that's a huge amount of, rural America. It's hard to find, at least here in East Tennessee down here, there are some 1,000 acre, 5,000 acre farms, but those are rare. Those are like super old money, super old generations, first settler kind back in here. Most people are running about 100 acres at the moment or less. So those are not going to be getting the fertilizer. And then what is also happening in conjunction with this, and I'm making a bold call here, we are going to have a corn shortage, because the herbicides that are needed when you plant corn is to alleviate and remove grass out of the rows in between the corn. And corn takes a lot more fertilizer. They call it heavy feeding. And it takes a lot of herbicides there to keep, because grasses are tenacious. Yeah, so flat leaf plants, those are pretty easy to kill. You look at those dandelions and, broadleafs, things that have a much bigger leaf on them. Amaranth would be another one, nettles, these kind of things. Those are edibles for us, right? But for a farmer, those are weeds in the middle of the field. But grasses, they're rough to kill, and they get the weeds and the roots go down deep. So they're competing for the same nutrients that are being applied in the fields. So there's going to be a decline on the yields because they don't have enough inputs in there to knock out the weeds. So the weeds are going to compete with the same nutrients. So the kernel size won't be as large, the bean size won't be as large. And there's a few things going on beyond that. So the fertilizer shortages are huge.
Yeah, there's an article that I read that said that two shortages that threaten to eviscerate the global economy in 2022. And one of those things was food shortages due to fertilizer prices. And another thing was car manufacturers, right? And not being able to produce the amount of chips that go into the cars in order for them to go to the market, right? And this is what happens. I mean, what happens is exactly what you're talking about, right? What happens when the farmers get hit too, right? What happens when soil and grain get so expensive that they can't afford it, right? And it was already hit really hard to find seeds and grain at the beginning of 2021. So what happens when they can't afford it anymore? Or a big natural disaster happens and wipes out large portions of lands and crops, affecting global crop yields, like in Madagascar with the cyclone wiping out the vanilla bean production, and the Tonga volcano eruption that we have no idea what that's going to do, and the impact of that in the 2022 harvest and beyond. And this moment that I'm talking about is vastly approaching, like you're talking about with soil and grain being at an all-time high, and eventually, seeds basically being non-existent anymore, especially organic seeds. Like, you can't find those bad boys anywhere. I mean, True Leaf Market was even out of pretty much everything at the beginning of 2021. And you can't forget about, you can definitely forget about trying to find or buy heirloom seeds when things really go down. Not going to happen, right? We're seeing a steady, a big pickup of, natural disasters too, right? Like what I like to call unnatural disasters, because they're anything but natural. They've been using weather modification technology, geo engineering for decades now, cloud seeding technology. I mean, look up in the sky, right? Does anything about it, look natural?
Today's all blue, and you're right. You go from a completely blue sky and then you start seeing the lines up there. And see, that's one of the things I talked about for years was, okay, geoengineering ongoing, Harvard's doing it, Cambridge has their program, NASA's delving into it. They're looking at the different types of particulates to put up, from the metal to the calcium carbonate. There's just an enormous amount of things that are being tested on this to put a layer of sun bouncing medium up there. But then, like this Tonga eruption, it went up to 180,000 foot in the center column. And then you have the particles up there, plus all the new ash. So if maybe it would have come out naturally, and there's a dispersion rate of, I think it's about 3 years. So when it's dispersed up there, the finest of the particles after about 3 years will make their way to the ground. But now you're adding in all this extra ash and sulfur dioxide. Will that be 3 years, or will it be an exponential runaway thing? Because, I want to go back to the corn, because this is the most important thing. Like, I really cannot get it across right here. This is the beginning of the de-evolution of society when we have corn shortage, because corn's used for everything, mainly the animal fodder. Okay, then if we go the knock on, then we're talking about beef prices, dairy prices. But then what about ethanol? There's an enormous amount mandated into the fuel supply. So that's going to be a disruption in the fuel supply, because we already have the pipelines cut up. So we can't go back to 100% like we used to have. Remember, for those of you who are not that old, we never used to have ethanol in the petrol at all. It used to be 100% petrol. There was no additives into it that are, causing more friction and damage in your engine. There's E85 stuff, unless your car is rated for it. The old guys here, back in the 1930s and 40s, used to distill their own alcohol to run in their engines. Right. And then they made that illegal, moonshiners, whatever. It wasn't about moonshining and drinking. It was about fuel production with no tax paid. So again, you could go back to Reefer Madness with that whole thing, with all the different usables that are inside the hemp plant competing directly with industry. But at the same time, the distillers out here, they were doing massive, just runs and runs, 55 gallons, every several hours were coming out of some of these stills. They were their own fuel production companies using corn out here, corn mash, moonshine. But they demonized it as moonshine. Everyone is getting moonshine with the jug. No, it was about they made their own fuels without paying tax. So, everybody apparently was doing this around the countryside. So the oil companies trying to get their fingers in at a single distribution point through that nozzle they can tax and charge. They had to, again, get big government involved to then do the whole thing and, get different groups like NGOs of the 1920s saying our husbands drink too much, we need to outlaw alcohol. Then the prohibition, and that was really it. The prohibition was really the thing with the corn that stopped people from making their own fuels in the countryside. Now, with that said, today's corn is used in an enormous amount of food products. Like there's almost nothing that's not corn based, especially if you go to a supermarket. So the farmers are switching over to soybeans, which is going to be a problem for them because, there's going to be a Himalaya size mountain of soybeans laying around, a coffee cup full of corn to supply the nation. Farmers are going to get priced out because they're going to be a glut of soy. But then on the corn side, oh my, we're not going to have enough. And where are you going to import that from? Because I'm going to say one last thing, Ryder, you hit it on the head. Tonga eruption is going to cool the southern hemisphere and reduce their crop yields. I've done extensive videos, at least a 40-minute video compilation on this. Argentina, South Africa. These two are going to be the most heavily affected because they're in the mid-grow season. Now that's for this year because they're in the mid-grow. They're not at harvest, they're past plant. Plants are trying to uptake and grow, but then they're going to get covered with acid rain. And precipitation patterns are shifting, light, not as much. A little bit cooler temperature is going to be about, say, 1 degree Celsius. So just like, let's say 1.5 degree Fahrenheit, cooler average temperature. That'll also pinch in on the grow times. So I did this whole analysis of which countries are in mid-grow at this time and which ones are into harvest and which ones hadn't planted yet. So the biggest wild card, Argentina. I mean, they're major suppliers of corn, and they even were withholding their corn exports because they were having a corn shortage. So anybody who thinks like Brazil and Argentina are just going to supply all this corn that magically disappears because we don't have the fertilizers, everything's going to be affected by this lack of corn production. And then that all stems back to not having enough herbicides to control the grass in the rows. And then the amount of fertilizer that corn uptakes being so great compared to other crops. Like we've pinched ourselves into a corner on reliance on a single thing. We're pinched in a corner on reliance on oil. Now we're pinched in a corner on reliance on corn. And both of those seem to be disappearing in front of us. So I don't know, it is manufactured in my opinion. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and you're definitely right about that we could be seeing acid rain, and then what kind of sunlight are the crops getting by the sun being blocked out from the ash? And when you get less yields, where are those countries going to get their product from? It's going to have to be, well, if they are, it's going to have to be imported, right? And then that puts more strain on the countries that are already experiencing shortages.
And then you're in a bidding war at that point, if it's even available. And, the misnomer is, I can just import it and buy it from another country. Well, the world's scrambling right now. China's buying half of everything on the open global market. So China will pay anything for the food now. It feels for me, they just closed their third port now, and there's a fourth port. They even closed Shenzhen, Ningbo, Shanghai, just in the last week. So it seems like they're walling themselves off. The stuff keeps coming in. Imports keep coming in, rolling in on the food shipments, but everything outbound has kind of ceased across the East Coast. Super drip feed of the exports coming out of China on a boat. Seems like they're walling themselves off, and they're really willing to pay anything over market price. So then when you come to these, more impoverished nations or ones that, are not superpower economies that really rely on using other people's money, like using the dollar as their currency because their currencies are so unstable or not valued across the planet. So they have to alternatively uptake another currency to pay for their imports, dollars. These countries are not going to get the food they need. They're already talking about a 30 million ton. This is if supply chains continue to function perfectly, a 30 million ton deficit decline, non-available, not grown, harvest yield declines in Africa this year because of not enough fertilizer. 30 million tons. Where are you going to make that up? You just don't, because every country is going to experience the same thing of a decline. And the southern hemisphere countries are going to experience declines from the fertilizers and also declines from the acid rain and the ash from the Tonga eruption. Like it's dovetailing into something really we haven't seen in more than 400 years, or maybe even thousands, plural, of years now, with the amount of things that are limiting food production and food availability for a populace. And then they're going to revolt. And then what? So you already filled in that piece there. There's already another plan, which I'd like to hear, because people are going to go to the streets when they get hungry. It always happens. So then what?
Yeah, and then we have the trucker strike in Canada that's been joined by a bunch of U.S. truckers, and I can't help but to think in my logical mind, based off of the past and governments, that it's a bogus banner. There's a lot of common misconceptions about bogus banners, because when people hear that word, they think in their mind that the event isn't real, right? But in reality, it's very real, though it's just a staged event to make us believe it happened organically in order to push people in a desired direction, right? These events are made to look like it came from a certain country, race, group, or rogue individuals, when it's really the opposite, right? It's a large scale planned event with an objective. And it's most commonly used for events to perpetuate war. But in this case, I believe it's a manufactured food shortage, right? And we've become so desensitized to this because the building blocks are stacked so far in advance to gauge the public's reaction, to freely accept the agenda as a problem, reaction, solution. And the groundwork is laid out years before, right? Using entertainment like movies, TVs, video games, social media, where thoughts and ideas are planted like seeds, right? In our subconscious mind, trickling down into our daily lives to train our minds to see what's going to happen, so the event largely goes off without a hitch. And it's all designed to get you on board with an agenda while tricking you into believe that you're doing something for the betterment of society. The bogus banner events have been taken to such great lengths, David, pulling on the heartstrings of people, using their emotions against us. Nothing is off limits to these orchestrators, right? Whatever it takes to see the agenda through, and the best way to get us to react and be subservient is to make us think that it's our idea. The media comes in, flooding the airwaves with the desired outcome. Anything can be painted in a positive or a negative light through the mainstream media, through manipulation. And if the media doesn't want you to see something, then they're not going to show it. They won't air it. The bogus banner programs are so sophisticated and well orchestrated that the majority will never know they're being used and are actively participating in a bogus banner event, because it's painted in such a way for the betterment of society that everyone can get behind it and support it.
The flash mobbing that's been occurring across the US, again, I would point into one of these things. Flash mobs, finally the police are taking action, but it's set in there, the seed. Everybody understands what a flash mob is. They all understand the lexicon. They know what it does. It rolls in it like a locust and then takes everything and runs away. As these food shortages increase and there'll be people on the streets, food prices will be too high, inavailability. There'll be just craziness in the stores, but the first thing they'll do is they'll put troops in the stores and the military and police to control. Now, that'll work for a little while, but then it'll get out of control at the end of the year. Now, when the harvest, there'll be some timelines with this. So the great awakening of like the mama bear of the family and just general person understanding this will be May, June. It'll be making all the headlines. Like, we're not gonna have a fertilizer, and then the news is going to run with the shortages to cause more shortages, because they're going to create the false shortages by putting in the news that there's so much shortages, encouraging people to run out and even buy more. Self-fulfilling feedback loop on that, which they want to push. They need it to happen. They have to have the food runs on the stores, because that in turn will be the catalyst for then the flash mobs out in the countryside running in, pillaging. They might come in with, let's say, 10 SUVs and 40 people, and they'll strip a farm, or they'll strip a field, or they'll strip an orchard, or they'll pillage a warehouse, or they'll do something, just like they're doing with the 5-star goods and, handbags and jewelry and whatever it is now. That will be the catalyst for them. And I'm saying it. And, there's no way in anybody's right mind that you would let the military occupy your farmland across the nation, unless the flash mobs were targeting farms. And then the army would be, in some people's opinion, a welcome relief from having to do like Wild West style. Everybody put perimeters up of all the neighbors doing watch on radios and stuff around. Temporary housing is quite easy to construct. So it'll be fed to us, as the army needs to be out on the farms to protect it, because there's so many flash mobs. And now the point where the local police and the local farmers and communities can't protect themselves anymore. So we need to station troops out in the farming country, which would be a no-no. That would be called an invasion before. And there would be people behind every tree, every blade of grass, there would be somebody behind it. But if you can switch it a little bit, and everything's been in play already, you can see how it's unfolding. So whole army out into the countryside, they wouldn't put them out here in the winter. That would do no good. There's nothing out here to steal in the winter except the warehouses. So if May and June, you see the awareness of Mama Bear and the general populace understanding food shortages are here, the harvest time is when they would start putting military out all across the countryside in all the farming communities across the US. But then at what point do they get a call one day, quit protecting, go look for all these people? That's the only way I can see it done. And that will have to be occurring around August or September, just before. So the flash mobs will be rolling in right around when things are maturing in the fields. So each of our latitudes is going to have a different maturation date. So if this is going to occur, you would start to see military movements and maybe people welcoming them into more northerly latitude grow belts, Indiana, Ohio, Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, Montana. How would you get military into Montana in the farm fields? No way right now. That's like a bastion. But if it's a different, presented in a different way, Minnesota, Idaho, these old northerly latitudes, and then it'll slowly drift south. They're going to follow the harvest. Well, then the next month, when you get in, and then especially right around like late September, early October, if the flash mobs are running wild out in the farms, when everything's here, everything's stocked, packed, it's in boxes, it's ready to ship for harvest. What if somebody comes rolling in with their 18-wheelers in a convoy of like 400 armed people and strips something out with several 18-wheelers? This is where the point will be, where they're going to demand military stay out in the farming communities to protect the food, because there'll already be such a food shortage that there'll be demand that you get out here and protect the food supply, the food distribution points, the warehouses, and even the farms themselves. We saw this in 2008 over in Thailand. They were getting their rice fields stripped at night. People would drive in and, go in with the harvesting machines after their rice fields were fully matured, and then strip multiple acres in the evening and just drive off with it. Then they did have to put military out there as patrols to stop these nighttime marauders. I'm just learning from the past. I'm simply looking at what happened 8 or 10 years ago in Thailand, 12 actually. So think about that. Could it occur again here? Of course it could. So this is, I think, the plan. So those are the two main dates, May, June, and then coming into the harvest season, September, October. So those are going to be two pivots for what you're mentioning, society, and also the way things are coalescing, food pricing, not available, people's reactions, because they're going to react a certain way. They've already gamed this a million times. Food shortages create this type of reaction every single time. So then it's already planned for.
Yeah, they have contingencies for every single thing that happens. But my thoughts are, is the flash mobs going to be organic people, or is it going to be staged and planned, right?
Okay, a little of both, maybe.
Because if it's organic and it's actually people that are hungry and that is needing food, that's a different kind of story. But I don't think that that's the way that it's going to be. It's going to be a planned event, right? And they're going to pay people to go out and disrupt these people's food and the farmers and stuff so that they could bring in the military to guard the crops and to guard people's food. That's the way that I see it, because I really don't. It would take a lot. It would take a lot for people to get to that point, and it would have to be a very, very slow process, right? It's going to take a lot of time, and to get people to organically go and steal people's food and steal their crops in the United States, because we're good people here, right? We have good hearts, and we normally have each other's back. So I feel like the only way that that's really going to happen here is if we are at the lowest point that we could possibly be, right? Where we are completely starving, we have nothing, and we're hungry.
The people that have been used so far to bring us to this point, if they organize them as the organized portion, not the hungry family looking for food, but as an organized thing, as it has been in so many cities, if they were pushed out in the countryside and said, hey, we will pay you to go do this out there, they know that there's going to be a lot that will not come back, like an enormous amount.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps they're counting on that, as that's the way you get rid of them. Because, in all these revolutions, they use the foot soldiers first, and then they need to get rid of them anyway, because then they become the threat, because they become too organized. And you've seen this through history. I don't care what chapter of history you want to dive into. There's going to be a myriad of ways that this thing will be spun to arrive at that last point, where military and troops will be stationed in the farms just out of what you appear something different, but then it will suddenly flip 180 degrees one day, because they couldn't occupy these areas down here.
Yeah, there's not enough people to do that. The military isn't big enough, because if you had all the military in the United States, then who's occupying other countries, right? They don't have enough manpower to be able to do that. So I see it as they will protect the biggest places that are manufacturing and growing the most amount of food and the most amount of crops, and then they'll leave the smaller and the littler people to their own devices, right? And whatever happens to them is what happens to them, and it won't really matter and won't really make a difference, because if that's what happens, then it's going to be devastating to a lot of people, and it's going to catch a lot of people off guard. But I don't think that they're so much worried about the smaller people and the people that aren't a part of this bigger system, the people that are just growing for themselves, or they're helping a few select people, or they're selling some of their crops and selling some of their fruits and some of their vegetables and stuff. They could care less about them. Like, who cares what happens to them, right? They're worried about the big people, the ones that are growing for the stores, the ones that are growing for, that have contracts with the government to distribute their product.
Oh, I agree, because look at what COVID has done, is wiped out almost every small business and independently owned business across the world. So everything's back to corporate control of all business, pretty much. Not going to say 100%, but comparatively to, let's say, 2018, when everybody was Airbnb and all the travel thing, everybody independent business, let's start this, let's do it. It was like a Wild West wheeling and dealing. Everybody was starting their own business, completely getting off the teat of the gov, and, really going out and starting their own thing. But, how many businesses have gone out of business since the COVID thing? Millions, plural. So again, if you take it just to the same way, if you're not in the corporate usage of inputs and then returns back to, like, Kellogg's, for example, factory type production, yeah, you're right, you're in competition with that. The thing that I see with the restrictions was to wipe out all small business. Well, you need to wipe out all small farms, so then everything still comes under corporate control. Now it's just the next step of consolidation and control. But, business is one thing, and then food supply is quite the other. So if you can bring both of those and wipe out everything on the, like I say, it's a small side, so everything is corporate and gigantic, that's it.
the cards have been stacked against us to such a degree that it's almost so overwhelming, David, that it's almost impossible to see any way out, right? But we can get a way out, right? And I don't have that solution. I don't have that what we can really do besides take care of yourself and do the things that you need to do. Stock up, create, learn a trait, learn welding, learn and do things, learn survival skills, learn how to be a productive member of society, like figure out electrical work, plumbing. Like all of these things are going to be very, very essential in the near future, because everything is going to collapse. It all has to collapse. Everything still has to go. They still have to collapse all of the old systems to get everybody on board with a new one. And if we go the opposite direction and we get the freedom for everyone, right? The golden age of humanity, right? Where everyone's living in harmony, where things are good for everyone, everything still has to collapse. Right? We're in a very critical time right now, right? And these things just don't happen overnight. It's a long and slow process. It's a long and slow subversion, right? Because again, they have to trick us, right? In order to trick us into thinking that it's our idea. And I know, and I've said that a few times already, but it's the truth. It's 100% the truth. Anything that happens in our reality is all tricked to make us think that it's our idea. So look at the opposite thing. Whatever they're promoting, do the opposite. Whatever they're saying, do the opposite. If they're saying that it's up, it's down. If they're saying it's left, then it's right. That's really the best advice that I can give anyone, right? And to see through all of the illusions and stop giving your power away to illusionary outside sources to get you hooked into a certain view of reality.
How many thousands of years has this been going on? If not millions. As I've been told by others, this is not the first rodeo. This has been going on. This is a multi-millennia, multi-century reset cycle, reset, recycle, reset, cycle, reset, cycle, just during this time, during the interglacials. But what was occurring during the time of full glaciation, when weather patterns had stabilized for 40,000 years, after full ice, 2 miles of ice over Chicago, Cleveland, whatever, Buffalo, those weather patterns stabilized for 40,000 years, far longer than anything, 4 times longer than anything we understood in agricultural history here. Like 7,000 years. They didn't know. They knew row cropping and they didn't understand the exact plant, the exact harvest date, like we wired it out. Now it's for certain specific heirloom seed varieties, etc. Okay, that's 7,000 years. They were talking 40,000 years of extremely stable climate. And then coming out of the Younger Dryas era, and that'll go get mixed up. And something brought us out of the ice age, 21,000 years ago. It started to shift. And then, what was that catalyst? Because there was nobody driving their SUVs around and whatnot. So, are these control mechanisms the same ones that would have been set in place to control the populace for 40,000 years on the planet during the ice age? And what about the last previous interglacial? With no information from that. And what about the one prior to that and those 40,000 years of stabilization? Then these, 7,000 years in the interglacial of stabilization. It just goes from pattern of weather nature stabilizing, and then it seems control systems right on top of that stabilization. We're coming into a time now, magnetic field shifting. May of 2023, it's supposed to hit 40 degrees. And once it does that, it's going to get into weaker field strength lines, and shoom, it'll just go where it wants to faster. A lot of things on the just natural side in the solar system here happening. But then, control mechanisms on top of these events. We're coming into a flux or a chaos event now. That's a change of an age. It's just the beginning of the change of the cycle. It'll stabilize itself eventually in 5, 6, 7 generations. But once that stabilization reoccurs, then what's going to be riding on top of that as a control mechanism? Because right now, you're right, everything's going to shift, bend, break, morph, twist, whatever you like to do through these next several generations of change, because we're right at the cusp of the beginning of the change of the cycle. It's not going to be an instantaneous event. This is the beginning of it.
Yep.
It's going to take many generations for this to roll out and complete itself.
Yeah, they're currently preparing for a really big natural disaster, a big natural, huge one that is potentially going to be catastrophic. And we've gotten so much programming for that, the natural disaster programming. I mean, the new movie Don't Look Up, an asteroid, like we've been hearing about asteroids and stuff for decades now. It seems like NASA's always, oh, there was an asteroid that came really, really close to Earth. It barely just missed us. You know what I mean? So there's so much programming for a natural disaster, and they're not going to tell us about it. They're not going to tell us about it until it's too late. Right. And they already know. They already know about it. Now, again, I don't know what this natural disaster is going to be. I have absolutely no idea, but I know that one is coming, and I know that it's going to be really, really big, and they are preparing for it right now as we speak.
Let me set up the construct for our next talk here, Ryder. I got a date for you.
Okay.
So, I've been really heavily focused on the outer planets and the way the way they sit in their orbits. I call it a square. You can call it planetary geometry, whatever you like to refer to that, as where the planets sit in their orbits in the heavens. Well, when we're coming up to October of 2024, the planets, the way they will sit up there is the same that would repeat in 79 AD. So this is a once in a 2,000-year planetary reconstruction geometry. It's not an alignment by any means. It's a square up there of just where the planets magnetically. Earth will be between the sun and that new second magnetic field in October of 2024. It's going to be on the right. We're going to be in the middle, and the sun to the left. But as we exit October, we start to swing around in front of the sun. So as we come into springtime, northern hemisphere, it's going to be Earth, sun, all the magnetic giants behind it, weakening, incredibly weak magnetosphere where like a grain of dust will probably make it to the surface. Now, at that point, the triangulation in the way it is, magnetically, everything's going to be pulled onto our planet, and there will be nothing in front of us blocking. There will be no Jupiter, Saturn, anything to pull any debris away from us. We are going to be going headlong into streams of debris for six months solid. There will be no gravitational help from any other body in our solar system except pulling it to us, smashing it through our atmosphere. And I encourage everybody out there to take a look at solarsystemscope.com. It's a free software. You just run it online on your browser. You don't need to download anything. Just press run, and then move the planets out. And you'll see what I mean. Once it gets to, to about 6 months, March of 2025, we're literally sitting out there by ourselves with everything pulling, all those massive, massive gravitational bodies pulling everything at them from one single direction. But we're the thing that's in front of that one single direction for 6 months. Our planet is going to be pummeled after we go through the magnetics and the plasma in the skies, and then you're going to get the debris raining in from the heavens. That's going to be an interesting couple of years. See, it all adds up to these big cycles repeating. People knew, governments in power knew, they all understand these cycles of cyclicity. Well, this world can't be salvaged. It's kind of it's run its end course. It was great. We used the tech to build a bunch of underground places. We used the tech to build a bunch of high-tech weaponry so they can protect and then reset up their control structures after this event's over. Wow, I guess we just got played. But anyway, we did,
David, and that's exactly right. I mean, we live on a very unstable planet. These cataclysms happen every so often, but again, they don't tell us that. They turn it into something that we are doing to create it, right? And they decided to make money off of that. They're like, oh, how can we make people, how can we tax the air, right? How can we make money off of the air?
It's going to be a new pillar of the new money structure, because if you're using carbon credits as a base of one of the pillars of the new economic system, everything going to revolve around that. It's not to forget, you know, the money is one thing, but have a base pillar of a new currency. And that would be one of the base pillars, which goes into not allowing anybody in sections of forest that then could be run through an algorithm of an average tree species. And then from there, you could see how much carbon would be sequestered, but then you couldn't let anybody live on the forest or use it. You'd have to remove people completely out of the equation, digitize that, and set the forest aside as a carbon capture unknown value, and then plug that into the carbon credit system. And then that would be a base pillar, but you need to set off like really tens of millions of square kilometers or whatever of forest to run that, because that would be a quantifiable, measurable value, but there could be no human input into it. So humans would have to remove from like, you know, a quarter of the planet for this scheme to work. It's a pillar of the new economy. Leave your comments below, see what you liked about our talk today. And again, you know, I was trying to frame it for the next talk as well. I was limited on time because I'm out here trying to do some bush clearing today, you know, along the road. So we have much more room to put gardens down, and then it's right next to the creek down there. So we're gonna, you know, widen it completely out, for the airflow access in there, so we get a lot more airflow, but then to be able to put a garden down there, much larger garden, because we're going to experiment with hay bales this year by doing hay bale gardening. And that's the way it'll be. So, you know, we're doing a lot of land clearing right now because there's no leaves on it, which saves you an enormous amount of time in bulk. So you just left with sticks. And then my buddy Ryan's here, and we're going to do a lot of collecting because we ripped up a bunch of trees and roots. So we're going to be going out there, and he's out collecting different roots, and we're going to do tinctures with those. And I'm going to go cut down some small willow trees right now, and we're going to use the entire willow tree, because most time we're concerned like, don't cut too much bark because you don't want to kill the tree. But since we're cutting them down anyway, we're going to try to do a mass batch of you know, willow tinctures and see what we can do for this type of thing, because we got, you know, 2 20-foot trees that we're cutting down. So it's all about the land clearing is one thing to get the land more utilized or usable. But at the same time, when we're clearing, what are the natural medicines that are in those barks, the roots, the stems, because there's no leaves right now. So
do you have any sap trees there?
Yeah, we sure do. And I've been out notching a bunch of stuff to see what kind of sap. It's a little early for the sap to run, probably another 2 to 3 weeks, but I want to notch a bunch of stuff out. So when the sap runs, it'll go in there first. So then I go around a couple of 2 or 3 days, take a look at the different saps that are running. We got this cherry tree, this most beautiful red sap coming out of it. And,
yeah, tap those trees, dude. Tap all of them.
Yeah,
get all that sap out of there.
Yeah. So again, you know, there's a lot of things that we're learning about. What are the natural medicines around here from the roots? If you're going to land clear and something has value of a root that could be turned into a tincture, or a dried herb that could be made a tea, whatever, I don't know, barks, the cambium inside. I'm interested in trying to do the cherry tree. We got knocked down one by accident. So I want to get the cambium out of the cherry tree and see what that tastes like cooking it up versus the pine tree, which I don't like too much. It's always just yuck. Pine tree cambium. I guess if you're starving. Okay. But I heard these other trees taste a little better. So, you know, we got a mimosa tree for the cambium, and also this cherry tree and one hickory tree. So these are already cut down and they're already dead, and they're ripped out the roots. So we're going to try all these different parts of the trees and see what we can do with it. So
let me know how that goes for sure. And if anybody wants to check out my channel, I talk about all kinds of crazy stuff over there. So come on over if you
Raised by Giants.
Raised by Giants. Yeah, I release a video every week on a Tuesday at 6 p.m. PST, and I talk about it's a different topic every week. And if you want to come over there, I'd very much appreciate it. And
I'll put the link below to Ryder's channel there, Raised by Giants, so you don't have to look for it online. You can just click and go. Anyway, thanks for spending your valuable time with us today. Hope you got something out of our conversation that can help you moving forward to get more prepared for your families, your friends, and our communities, as these things do manifest a change as we get through 2022. A lot more change than the last couple of years. Last couple of years is just a smidgen of change. This year, I believe, is going to be the massive change year. Wrap your head around that for a minute. Anyway, thanks for watching, and bye for now.